All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to our webinar today. Let's see here. I've got one more thing I want to bring up here, and we're good. All right. Give you a little intro. Good morning, and welcome to Emerald Ash Borer University. This is Robin Osborne from Michigan State University, and with my EAB University colleagues, Cliff Sadoff, Elizabeth Barnes from Purdue University, and Amy Stone from Ohio State. We are happy to share with you today's webinar entitled Emerald Ash Borer Deregulation and Continuation of USDA APHIS EAB Biological Control Program, which is presented today by Herb Bolton and Ben Slager from the USDA APHIS. Herb Bolton serves as the National Policy Manager at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Plant Protection and Quarantine Emergency and Domestic Programs in Riverdale, Maryland. That's kind of explains what APHIS means and USDA means, if for those of you who aren't familiar. His program responsibilities include policy management for the emerald ash borer and biological control. He is board certified as an entomologist with a master's degree in entomology from Rutgers, the State University, and a PhD in entomology from the University of Florida. Ben Slager is an entomologist by training and currently directs the Emerald Ash Borer Biological Control Rearing Facility in Brighton, Michigan. He joined the EAB program in 2015 and has worked to facilitate expanding the biological control release footprint, increase public awareness of EAB biological control, and communicate technical information across national working groups. Ben also collaborates with USDA colleagues to further understand the biology and interaction of the EAB and its associated parasitoids. To our participants today, we welcome your questions and comments. Please type them in the Q&A feature or in the chat pod, and we will respond to them after the webinar presentation. Tomorrow, you will be emailed a link to a short, voluntary, confidential survey that we hope you will take the time to fill out. It helps us bring these free educational webinars to you. The email will also include our presenters' contact information, as well as information on how to obtain CEUs for viewing this live webinar. So for those of you needing CEUs, hold on till tomorrow and you'll get the email and it will give you all the information. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on the EAB University page of the www.emeraldashborer.info website. Thank you for attending today, and Herb, please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Robin. Well, I appreciate being invited to speak today, and I'm glad Ben Slager can join me to take part in dividing the presentation into two parts. So I'm sorry to slow you up a little bit. Had a little trouble with many screens here, and I hope what you can see is adequate for you.
It looks good.
Good. So for today's presentation, we really have two parts. I'm going to speak first and tell you where we stand in the status of our deregulation, which just occurred recently, and can tell you what programs are ending and which ones are continuing. And then Ben, in the second part of the presentation, will speak in more detail about the biological control program and how that's continuing and how states and other state partners can get involved. So specifically for my part of the presentation, I want to bring you up to date on the status of the Emerald Ash Borer program since there's been such a significant change. I would like to take a few moments and go back and share with you some initial information about the EAB detection that occurred back in 2002, and just show you, if you haven't ever watched, what the spread of EAB was from where it started to where it ended up when we deregulated. And then specifically list the programs for you that have stopped and the programs that are continuing in a little more detail. And then to update you on some resources that we've been careful to update since deregulation occurred. Well, just looking what just happened here in the last several months, in December on the 15th in 2020, APHIS published in the Federal Register the final rule that deregulated the domestic EAB quarantine programs. And in that December Federal Register notice, it listed January 14th, 2021 as the date to end those federal domestic EAB quarantine regulations. Now, going back, the initial indication from APHIS in the Federal Register that we were considering this action started back in September 2018. So it took a considerable amount of time to go through all the administrative and regulatory processes to get the final rule published. But as of January 14th, we, APHIS, lost the authority that we asked for to end and had no longer had the authority to take any action such as issuing permits, certificates, and compliance agreements as we had had for 18 years while we had that EAB quarantine in place. So this marks a significant change in the approach that APHIS has toward addressing EAB. And again, we're happy to have the opportunity to talk to everyone today about specifically what those changes are and what we're doing to go forward. Now, this change does allow APHIS to direct available resources that we have toward non-regulatory options to manage EAB. And specifically, we want to continue to get the message out to everyone that we are continuing our EAB biological control efforts that we've been doing for a number of years. And also indicate that we're continuing our research on EAB integrated pest management and other aspects of EAB biological control research. We also want to get the message out, and I'll speak just a little bit more to it later in my slides, on our continuing outreach to the public and to nonprofit organizations and others on the non-commercial movement of firewood, which those messages and outreach will continue. Okay, so it's not news to most people who are on this call, I'm sure, but we do know that EAB is a very destructive wood-boring pest of ash trees and native to China and other areas of East Asia. It was first discovered in 2002 in the United States in southeastern Michigan, and it was attacking healthy ash, which really got the attention of people pretty quickly because that's not normal for forest pests to have that kind of action where you can actually kill the ash from the attacks. Dendrological reconstruction studies did show that EAB was established in southeast Michigan by at least early 1990s, and it had begun to kill ash trees in the greater Detroit area by 1998. So when we discovered it, so to speak, in 2002, it actually had been there longer than we first realized. Michigan Department of Agriculture began a quarantine in 2002, and the first domestic quarantine from APHIS was put in place in 2003. So what I'd like to do is just quickly show you just a few maps. I won't go year by year, but I'll kind of skip ahead just to review with everyone how significant the spread of EAB was from that initial find in southeast Michigan. So here's a picture of the United States, eastern United States primarily, with some counties highlighted in red in Michigan in December, this end of December of 2002. Well, at this point, there was no federal quarantine in place. And by 2003, December 2003, you can see on the map, there's a blue line, and that's where the federal quarantine was put in place during that year. But you'll already notice that the infested counties had increased from where they were just 1 year before. And you'll notice that within Michigan and then in Ohio and even over in Maryland, there was a find of EAB, well outside the established quarantine area. Jumping ahead to 2007, the attempt to delineate where EAB was and to maintain quarantines is shown by the expanded quarantine area, which included Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And once again, there's significant movement of EAB on infested counties, in Michigan and expanding into those other states. And again, you can see that there was at least one or two examples of where EAB was found in states outside the quarantine area. Moving ahead to 2012, the movement of EAB infested counties just continued. So the quarantine area was significantly expanded. The infested counties continued to accrue. And there were a few satellite populations where EAB was found, satellite counties that were included in the quarantine that weren't contiguous with the others. But even then, if you look, you can see that there are some counties like down here in Tennessee and up in Maine, where there were counties that were outside the quarantine area. 2018, the story just continues. The infested counties just continued to grow in number. The quarantine was expanded. There were some outlying areas still to continue to occur. And I'm sorry to change the nature of the map here, the depiction of the map. But this is where we stood in January of this year with the quarantine map, essentially where it was in 2018, not much change. All the red dots are the different depiction of the infested counties. And we continue to see counties pop up outside the quarantine area in states like Nebraska, for example. Now, another way to look at this is to look at the same quarantine area and to overlay that with the approximate area for occurrence of ash. And that's what's depicted on this map. The quarantine area is shown, and all the red dots are the known infested counties. So you can see that emerald ash borer is continuing to move into areas that where ash is found on the eastern United States. So here we are, January 14th. Quarantine lines were removed on our map because we no longer have the authority to regulate emerald ash borer domestically. And we are going to maintain our emerald ash borer map of known infested counties, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, about how we're going to do that. And I'll show you a new map that we have that we're putting in place to replace the maps that we were using in the past. So at the end, when we were ready to deregulate, 35 states and the District of Columbia had EAB infestations. There were 1,680 counties that were within the federal quarantine until that time. And of those counties, there were a total of 1,184 that had EAB infestations. That was greater than 876,000 square miles, or approximately 28% of the contiguous 48 states were under EAB domestic quarantine at the end. Throughout this period, EAB quarantine for regulated articles in commerce was ineffective in stopping the spread of EAB. And EAB was continued to be found either by us or by our state partners beyond the quarantine boundaries. There are a lot of factors that were described in the final rule and have been in various publications that contributed to these facts that I just mentioned. But certainly, the natural spread of EAB and the ability of EAB to move itself and the movement of articles and non-commercial pathways, certainly contributed to the continued expansion of emerald ash borer across the United States. I should note just one other thing, that unlike some other pests that we deal with, for emerald ash borer, there was never a county that was put under quarantine that was ever removed from quarantine. So we never had a situation where we had methodologies to be able to remove a quarantine where we had put one in place. So specifically because of the final rule, we are no longer maintaining EAB domestic quarantine boundaries. We are not approving any regulatory treatments for regulated articles of EAB. We're not issuing limited permits for regulated articles. We're not issuing certificates to allow movement of regulated articles. We are not issuing kiln certifications, and we're not entering into APHIS PPQ compliance agreements with establishments who previously needed them. We aren't conducting any periodic physical visits to those facilities that had compliance agreements, and we are not investigating any quarantine violations because there is no quarantine anymore. I'll just say a few words about state regulatory programs. It's really an area that now belongs to the regulatory authority of the states. And there are individual states that have or may have established recently state quarantines to regulate the movement of regulated EAB material. And our advice is for, and if those situations arise, to contact the state plant regulatory officials for specific information on those state EAB regulations. One program that I do want to mention that was mentioned in the final rule is the fact that states may submit a petition for the federally recognized state managed phytosanitary programs. It's pronounced free stamp for EAB regulation. And this is a program that APHIS has offered for states that apply and qualify to have greater consistency against certain pest plants that arrive at US ports of entry and would be being shipped to a state. So if a state applies and gets this designation, we would continue to help that state regulate materials that were coming from the ports to that state and prevent the movement of that material to that state. There's a really good description of this whole program on the APHIS PPQ website. And I just want to mention it because it was an option offered to states in the final rule. We are going to continue to track new county infestations. We do not have a national survey like we did several years back, but we are going to continue to do some trapping ourselves. We're offering some materials to state cooperators for them to do surveys and continuing to do visual tree surveys. We're going to continue official identifications of submitted specimens for new state and new county designations. And as Ben's going to talk to the second part of the presentation, we are going to continue in earnest to rear and release biological control agents. And we're going to continue to work with our state and travel partners for the release of those agents in counties that have EAB infestations. So this is the new interactive map I was referring to. It's available on our EAB website. This is the infested county map, known infested counties. It has several different layers. The blue colored counties up in the Northeast here are counties from 2002 to 2019 that have EAB infestations known. The pink counties are infestations from last year, 2020. And there's a few red counties on there, and they're the ones that we know about that have occurred this year in 2021. You'll also notice on the map the brilliant colors down along the Gulf. This is the growth degree day maps that we used to send out in a static PDF form once a week to interested collaborators. Instead, we've put this layer on the map that shows the growth degree days. This is one I captured with a screenshot a couple of days ago, so it's not active, but it shows you the intent here. And down along the Gulf Coast, you see a red coloration right above it's orange. And looking at the degree day legend, orange is where EAB emergence would be expected to occur because of the accumulation of growth degree days. Peak activity is sort of the brilliant purple color down near Tampa. And then once you get past that, then you could be past peak emergence. These growth degree day maps have been helpful for collaborators and us in knowing when to do trapping for EAB and to set traps up out in the field and to make biological control releases. I'm going to let Ben talk about the EAB parasitoids, but these are the 4 we have, and he'll speak more to that. And I will just like to say that over the period of time that we've been doing biological control releases, we've released more than 8 million parasitoids in 30 states in the District of Columbia. We are continuing research on integrated pest management strategies. Julie Gould, our researcher, and her collaborators and some of our other federal partners are continuing research on areas that we need more knowledge on. One study that Julie is finishing up is on using pesticides, treatment of mature trees with pesticides and release of parasitoids to see if we can help maintain stands of ash from the attack of EAB and then withstand the initial attack on the mature ash and then have the parasitoids take place and provide protection. And we are setting up research in several parts of the country on the same sort of strategy in forested settings. We are continuing to do research and improving our biological control methods. One area that we continue to work on is matching the phenology of EAB and the parasitoids so we make correct releases. And another area is artificial diet. We go to a lot of effort to rear these parasitoids, and an artificial diet would help us improve the efficiency and production of parasitoids. We are going to continue to give training to states who are interested in doing their kiln certifications, and we can loan equipment, kiln probes, software, and temperature data interpretation for states that want to set up their programs where we used to do it in the past. And we are going to continue this communication and outreach to the public on the Don't Move Firewood campaign. We work with the Nature Conservancy. They have a great website, a lot of good outreach to a lot of individuals. And we've also worked, I don't have a slide on it, but we do recently work with the National Plant Board. If you go to their website, they have a firewood guidelines, and they have a toolkit for what the states are doing and how states can look at their regulations on firewood movement. And just coming to the end here, trying to keep us on time, we have gone to a lot of trouble as we've gotten to deregulation on updating resources on our website. So if you just Google PPQ EAB, our website will come up, or that link that I've listed at the top. So we've updated our EAB program manual. We went through the entire manual and took out all of the regulatory activities that no longer applies. And what is in the manual currently are still the programmatic elements that are going forward. Last year, we updated our biological control release and recovery guidelines, which are pretty detailed and describe how the procedures that our cooperators and we use to release the parasitoids. We have several question and answer documents on biological control and the change of our program and the release and recovery aspects, short summaries. And we also are continuing our EAB report, a quarterly report that comes out to just give updates on the program. And you can get that EAB report by signing up on the APHIS stakeholder registry. I think you can just Google it. And there's a little sign up sheet for the EAB report and a lot of other documents that may be of interest to you from APHIS. And with that, I've tried to go through the material as quickly as I can. I apologize for some of the difficulty that I've had because of my computer setup. But I hope that was all clear and visible to everybody. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. I'm going to stop sharing and let's see here.
Oh, I see it. You've got it, Ben.
Right.
You're good. Looks
Excellent.
good.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Herb. And my name is Ben Slager. I run the EAB Biocontrol Rearing Facility. And I am just going to touch on each of the topics listed in my title slide here. So just quickly on rearing, kind of where we are with releases, some of the data that's coming back from the releases, and then talk about requests for the program. So to get into this, I guess first it's just important to understand what biocontrol is, and I imagine we have a pretty diverse group here, so it's probably worthwhile just starting here. So to answer the question, what is biological control? Really, it's just the use of living organisms to control a pest. The pest is oftentimes exotic, and the biological control organism has co-evolved with that exotic pest, making it also exotic. The EAB program is considered a classical biological control program, largely because of the history going into it. So like Herb was saying, EAB was here way before we even discovered it. And then even after we discovered it, it was years later that we started the biological control program. So EAB had a huge head start. We were never going to eradicate EAB with the biocontrol. And so really our intent is to release the biocontrol agents, get them to establish and be a long-term pest control, a long-term control for EAB, which is exactly what a classical biocontrol program is. So by putting out the biocontrol agents, our hope is that they will mitigate any future outbreaks of EAB in the areas that they're at. So to talk just a little bit more about the biocontrol agents, the very top picture is emerald ash borer, as I'm sure you are all familiar with. And if you look at the map on the right-hand side, the green area is the native range of EAB. And then if we go below the picture of EAB and to the left, that is O. obeus. O. obeus was collected from the Jilin province of China. O. obeus is our egg parasitoid. If we move directly to the right from the picture of O. obeus, that is Tetrasticus planopenisi. It was recovered from the same province in China. And Tetrasticus is an ectoparasitoid, meaning that it will take its ovipositor and drill through the bark of the wood, it's an endoparasitoid, drill through the bark of the wood, put its ovipositor through the wood and into the EAB larva and pump it full of eggs. And it can be anywhere between 20 and 200 eggs inside of an individual EAB larva that then develop and eat their way out of that living EAB, killing it. And then they chew their way out of the tree. They go find another ash tree with EAB and the cycle goes on. If we go down below Tetrasticus and over to the left, that is a picture of Spathius Agryli. Spathius Agryli was collected from the Tianjin province of China. Spathius Agryli is an ectoparasitoid, so it lays its eggs on the outside of the EAB larva. Similar to Tetrasticus, it will take its ovipositor, insert the ovipositor through the bark, and then just before entering the EAB larva, it will deposit eggs on the outside of it. Much fewer eggs, more like 6 to 8 eggs on a single EAB larva. Their offspring will develop as well, but they will eat into the EAB, killing it, then emerging from the tree and going on from there. Spathius agryli is in terms of kind of life history or reproduction is similar to Spathius agryli. However, Spathius agryli was collected from Primorsky, which is the far east of Russia. And as such, it's much more cold hardy than Spathius agryli is. So we release Spathius agryli in the northern areas in the US and Spathius agryli in the southern areas in the US. And these are the 4 biocontrol agents that we have for the biocontrol program. And with these, we're kind of hitting all the life stages of EAB. With Oobius, we're hitting the egg stage, so we're able to kill it before it does any damage to trees. With Tetrasticus, we're able to attack some of the a little bit earlier larval stage, with the third instar larval stage, and Tetrasticus will provide protection to some of the smaller trees because it's smaller and has a smaller ovipositor. And then the Spathius species have a larger ovipositor, and they can afford protection to some of the larger trees because they are able to get through thicker bark. So where have parasitoid releases occurred? We've released parasitoids in 30 states, and we've put them in 342 counties at this point. There are several sites within individual counties, so we're at about 900 sites and well over 7 million parasitoids at this point in time. Okay, so now we have parasitoids out in the environment. And now the question is, are they establishing? Are they able to disperse? And what are the impacts that they're having on EAB? So are they able to establish is really the data that we ask cooperators to collect for us. So after you do releases, you go back and you survey and you look to see if the parasitoid is persisting in the site. And so this data is collected from Map Biocontrol, which is kind of our data warehouse. And just going through the counties for the individual parasitoids, Oobius has been recovered in 44 counties, Spathius Agryli 22, Spathius Agryli 12 counties. Spathius Agryli only started being released in 2015. Tetrasticus 70 counties. It is important to make the differentiation between recovery and establishment. We look at recovery as you've collected it 1 year and it's there, but are they able to persist there? And so that would be multiple years of collecting parasitoids without doing any releases. These numbers don't actually tell us about the establishment, but they are telling us that they are being recovered. And we can go further into these numbers to look at what establishment actually looks like. And that is something that will be going on in the near future for us. So we know that we can get them out in the environment. We do also know that we can get them established in the environment. So after that happens, are they able to disperse? So this figure on the right here is from work from Mike Jones and Julie Gould and others. And what they did is they tracked EAB movement and then the associated parasitoids along an ash corridor. And so the green dots are areas where EAB was caught. And then the kind of color scale there shows you the severity of the EAB infestation. And then the stars will show you where Tetrasticus was recovered along the way. So if you go from A, which is the first picture in that figure, all the way over to E, what you'll see is that EAB moves along down this corridor. And as EAB is moving along this corridor, you start to see the red stars follow it along from north to south. And so what this is showing us is that as EAB moves, Tetrasticus is tracking its movement rather closely, showing us that it is able to disperse. And we've seen this in other research sites as well. And so this focuses solely on Tetrasticus, but we do know that Oobius is also able to disperse. And if you've ever seen Oobius, you know that it's very tiny. It's about the size of a pepper flake. And so for it to move a single kilometer in just a few years really is quite a feat. And we are seeing Oobius dispersing from release sites out to other sites around it. And we're just kind of getting data in on Spathius Agryli because it was only starting to be released in 2015. But the data that we are getting back is suggesting that it can disperse as well, and that it's actually quite strong at doing that. So some of the data that we have says that it can disperse 14 kilometers within just a few years. So we are able to get the parasitoids out. They are dispersing. and now what is the impact that those parasitoids are having. So this is work done by Jian Duan and Leah Bauer and others at 6 sites in Michigan. And so to start with, we'll take a look at the EAB population density in the area, and you can see that it was really strong in 2008 and 2009, and then it started to decrease. So looking at that decrease, what they did is a life table study where they looked at what the factors were that were leading to the decrease in the EAB population. And so on the left-hand side, you can see the EAB growth rate, and along the bottom axis, you can see the years. If you look at the red line up the top, that shows you the EAB population growth if no parasitism is included. And so it's a fairly substantial population growth. If you look at the blue line at the very bottom, this is what EAB population growth would look like if all parasitism is included in it. And then the one in the middle is Tetrasticus. So if you were to take the impact of Tetrasticus out of the equation, the EAB population growth rate will increase. And so the difference between the area between that green line and the blue line is the impact that Tetrasticus is having on the EAB population. And then the area between that green line and the red line is other parasitism. So some of the native parasitoids are having an impact, like Atanicolis that you can see on the right there. But especially in those later years where that EAB population had really crashed at the end in 2013 to 15, what we can see from this is that Tetrasticus was having a fairly strong impact on bringing down the EAB population growth rate. But if you look at the overall EAB population growth rate, it's still at or above 2, which means it's growing fairly quickly. So we know that Tetrasticus is a small parasitoid and that it has a small ovipositor. And this particular research was done in a kind of a large variation in tree sizes, so from 7 to 21 centimeters. So if we do, what Jian did is he took this research and applied it to smaller diameter trees. And the lines and the colors are the same. So we look specifically at 2013 to 2015. And the red line up at the top is no observed parasitism. The blue line at the bottom is all parasitism. And the area between the green line, which is no Tetrasticus, and the blue line is the impact that Tetrasticus is having on the EAB population growth rate. So what we're seeing by this is that Tetrasticus is the main factor for the decrease in the EAB population growth during these years from 2013 to 2015. And in fact, what it does is actually takes the EAB population growth rate below 1, which means that the population is decreasing. So Tetrasticus certainly has the potential to have a very strong impact on the EAB population, particularly in small trees and when the EAB population is low. So if we look at these sites across years, you can see that the EAB, or I'm sorry, the percent parasitism by Tetrasticus was increasing from 2013 to 2015 in the release plots, which are the green bars. But the Tetrasticus parasitism is also occurring in the control plots. So again, showing us that they can disperse and that they are having an impact on the EAB population. So at this point, you're saying, well, this is really great for the small trees, but there are lots of large trees. What are we going to do about that? And that's where Spathius Agryli is coming in. And we're going back and we're trying to release Spathius Agryli at the sites where it wasn't previously released. And we're also releasing it at all of the sites where we're releasing Tetrasticus as well. So Spathius Agryli has an ovipositor that's roughly twice the size as Tetrasticus. And so it should be able to afford protection to much larger trees than Tetrasticus is able to. So my hope is that at this point, you're like, wow, this is a great program. I would love to get involved in this. And that's exactly what I would like to talk to you about now. So with the EAB program, we do work with a large number of different cooperators. We work with a number of government agencies, everything from local, federal, tribal, county government agencies. We work with universities, as well as different organizations that have some sort of an interest in forest health. So we do work with a diverse crowd to get involved in the EAB Biocontrol Program. So when we bring participants in, we want them to be aware of what the time requirement is. And so there are 2 years of releases. And after those 2 years of releases are done, it's not always mandatory, but we do want to be upfront that we may ask for 2 years of recovery after the releases have concluded. And then you will obviously need to find a release site. And what we look for in release sites are typically to be public or a collective property. We want to absolutely avoid releasing on personal private property. And you can find all of this information in great detail, as Herb had mentioned earlier, within our EAB Biocontrol release guidelines. And these guidelines can be found, if you just Google that name, it should be the first thing that comes up. Otherwise, you can go to mapbiocontrol.org, and there is a link to it towards the bottom of the page. So once you've decided if you wanted to get involved in the EAB Biocontrol Program and you start digging into the guidelines, you're going to see what it is that we look for in a particular site. And these are some of the major points that we consider when we're looking at approving a site. One is the minimum acreage. We look at having 40 or more acres at any particular site. In the ash density, we're looking at 25% ash or more, and having a low to moderate EAB density. So at this, you might be looking at this and then you'll say, well, I don't have anything that matches that. So these are guidelines, and that's what you need to keep in the back of your mind when you're considering this. So there's typically a caveat to all of this. So if you have a site that's 25% ash, it meets the low to moderate EAB density, but your acreage is only 10, there are other things to consider there. So if your site has some sort of an ash corridor, maybe to another larger site, your site might work. Or if you have low ash density, but it's a really large site, that might make up for it. So just remember that these are guidelines and that there's always a caveat, and my contact information is in these guidelines, as well as our release coordinator. And if you have questions at any point in time, feel free to contact us. That's why it's in there. We're happy to talk about these guidelines and the caveats that are involved in deciding if something is a good site. So we're at the point where you think you found a good site. You probably talked with us about the site, and now you're going to enter it into Map Biocontrol. Map Biocontrol is our data warehouse where all the information goes into. There is a function in here where it looks like you can communicate, and just to be totally upfront about it, it doesn't work. There is no communication that actually happens in Map Biocontrol. It is only a dated storage place. So you will go to Map Biocontrol. You'll have to register to get access to it. Once you have access, you can then put in the data that you collected for your site, and I will be able to see that data, and I can approve your site, or we can discuss, other issues with it, or gathering some of the data for it. And just as a side note, the other information that goes in here will be your release data after the site's been approved and you're doing your releases, as well as the recovery data once you get down the line, a few years in and you're doing the recovery. So you got your site in there, it's been approved, and now you need to start thinking about permits. You don't need to think about any federal permits in terms of receiving the biocontrols. We have permits for every state that has EAB, so we can ship to any of the states. The permit that you'll need to consider is like a local land use type permit. So you just need to have permission from whatever agency it is or entity that holds that property. In some cases, it's going to be an official permit. In some other cases that we've run into, it can be, you know, a verbal approval or an agreement between you and the landowner that those releases are going to occur there. But it's just important that that's considered so that nobody's caught off guard that there's biocontrol releases going on their land without them knowing. So now you have your permits, you're in MAP biocontrol, and now it's time to really start thinking about doing the releases. So for this year, all of our sites have already been assigned, and it's during the summer that would be a good time to start thinking about doing releases for 2022. And we need to have all of our site submissions for 2022 season by December 1st of 2021. And when you submit that information, there are a few particulars that we're looking to have. So we need to know who the site manager is of that particular release location. We'll need their name and their email. We also need the MAP bio ID for that particular site because that's how we discuss that site in the future. Although you'll give that site a name, it's always that MAP bio number that we'll use to identify that site. We need to know the county where the release site is located. We'll need to know the latitude and longitude of that site. And if you're submitting more than one site, please indicate your priority in terms of selection for the sites. So once those are submitted, we will look at assessing each of the sites. So we'll look at it in terms of suitability. You know, are these sites meeting the guidelines or falling within the caveats that we have of the guidelines? And then is that, or what species are appropriate to release in those sites? And so in the past, we've used the 40th parallel, and now we have a model that's based on growing degree days that helps to determine what parasitoids are released where. And that's when we would discuss which species are available for release in the sites that you submit. After we've done the site assessments, that's when we start with a bit more intense communication. So typically around February and March, and this is exactly what we're going through right now, is when we send out the sites that have been selected. And if you have any modifications in those sites, you know, or you've gone back and you've taken a look at that site and you found out that it's really deteriorated over the last couple months and you need to swap a site out for a new site, that's when those communications occur. We also send out a projected release schedule that's based on a 10-year average growing degree day calculation. And so it's at this point that you would say, okay, so my staff is only going to be available, you know, every other week or once a month. Can we modify the schedule that you're shipping, you know, sending out to me now? And so it's really during February and March that we really get our schedule and our communications solidified as to what the shipping season is going to look like, which typically starts in May. And then in May, when we really get to the shipping season, every shipment that goes out to a cooperator is accompanied with an email and a tracking number, so you're able to see that shipment that's coming out to you. And again, my contact information is in the release guidelines as well as Scott's, and Scott is the fellow pictured here in the photograph to the left. It's in there, and I'm letting you know now. Please feel free to use it. We are here and available to answer any of the questions to help this be as smooth a joining the program as it possibly can be. So with that, I will also give you an opportunity to write my information down if you would like to have it now, and just let you know that we're going to be here. We're always here to discuss biocontrol operation needs. But I also want to take a moment to say that the EAB Biocontrol team has been here, and they will continue to be here. They have been in the lab full-time since September, working on all of the production needs for EAB Biocontrol releases for this season. And you know, it's been a different year last year, and this year it's been a bit more difficult. But they are there, they are working hard, and they are producing the parasitoids so that we can get them out the door and in your hands and out into the field. And with that, I can stop and we can start taking questions.
Thank you, Ben. I would ask, I think, Herb, you may need to unmute your mic just so you can answer questions. But I've got some questions, a couple here for Herb during his presentation. Hold on here. What is happening in Canada? Did CFIA drop their domestic queue? If not, isn't it common for APHIS and CFIA to regulate in a similar way for exotics that they have in common?
Yes, let me just try to keep this as simple as the answer as simple as I can. Canada and their provinces, to best of my knowledge that I was just checking into the other day, as a matter of fact, they've maintained their internal quarantine for EAB, and for the deregulation for EAB was for our domestic programs. United States will recognize the country's international trade agreements and will continue to comply with regulated articles that we're shipping to them. So whatever their requirement is, we'll try to meet. So if you're someone in the United States who's shipping internationally, you still have to meet the international phytosanitary requirements for that state you're shipping to. And so our APHIS BPQ staff will be continuing to do that function. However, since we've deregulated EAB domestically, if something's coming into the country and it's identified as EAB, it's not any longer a regulated pest because we've removed our domestic regulations. If the specimen in a shipment can be identified only to genus, because there are other forest pests of the same genus that are pests, we would regulate it. The exception is the free stamp program that I mentioned just briefly on my slides, and I could talk in more detail to somebody who wants to know about that, is where a state comes in, applies, they have their internal or external quarantines, and if material is coming internationally to that state, APHIS will continue to help regulate that material so that it does not improperly enter that particular state. So it's gotten a little bit confusing. I'll be happy to talk to you more offline or separately, but that's sort of the short answer of what's happened because of the deregulation domestically.
All right, Herb, one more question from Cliff Sadoff. Can you elaborate on the work that integrates biological control with chemical control in urban areas?
Yeah, Cliff. Julie Gould is the person who's doing that research. She hasn't put out a publication yet, but the long and short of it is she's been looking at I want to say green ash site in New York. And I'd be happy to get on a call with you or set you up with Julie to give you much more detail. But the idea is that she goes into areas and selectively treats trees, which we know provides protection from EAB because these chemical treatments have worked very well. At the same time, making parasitoid releases, and she's doing some studies that are just wrapping up, and then she's going to continue to follow them. So the idea is that for those communities who have some valuable stands of ash, or a parallel study that she's trying to do in forested areas, which is just starting. The same concept, if there were tribes or others who wanted to maintain some stands of ash, they would use this combination of techniques. Because Julie hasn't published that yet, Cliff, would be happy to get you together with Julie and talk more about it. But it seems like it provides an integrated approach and an option either for urban communities or for natural areas to provide a higher level of protection.
Okay. Ben. Let's see. Nick asks, how do you know whether or not parasitoids are attacking native insects as well?
So before parasitoids were ever released into the environment, there was an environmental assessment done on each one. And part of that assessment is essentially giving them every opportunity to attack a whole suite of different insects, before, as an opportunity to show that they would not be a good biocontrol agent to put out into the field, to show us that they may present a greater problem than a solution to the problem that we do have. So this is several years of research looking at host specificity prior to applying for permits being granted, and then releases occurring. So searching for EAB biocontrol agents essentially started as soon as EAB was detected in the field. And shortly after those biocontrol agents were found, research on host specificity occurred. So this was several years of host specificity research before any releases happened in 2006. And if you're interested, you can find those environmental assessments on the EAB page within the USDA website.
Okay. Carla asks, is EAB an issue in all ash species, or are some more susceptible than others? And is this a global issue? Which she also means, is it also a huge problem in other countries, or is it more of an issue in the US?
This is Herb. I'll answer that, and maybe Ben can answer too. Obviously, we just had that question earlier. In areas where EAB is not native, it could be a problem, and it certainly is a problem in Canada. Provinces that closely border the US, I think there's 5 provinces with EAB that are a serious concern to the Canadians. So there's one example. I can't speak myself to a larger global problem, but certainly it's a big problem to Canada.
In terms of like the species, there's either they co-evolved. So in China, where EAB is native, it's not a huge issue there because it's co-evolved with the trees. The trees don't deal with it. The trees that encounter EAB in the US are susceptible and at kind of varying levels. And then there are ash trees in the US that don't encounter EAB, but most of them are, as far as we know, all of them are susceptible, again, at varying levels.
Yeah, Ben, this is Herb. I do want to add, I'm not an expert on this in the details, but we were listening to some webinars recently, and there is some work being done that shows that some of the ash species are a little more resistant than others. There's 16 species of ash in the United States, and in the areas where ash has been most heavily attacked, they're still susceptible, but there's some higher levels of resistance. And Dr. Jennifer Cook, Forest Service, we're supporting some of her research, and Forest Service is supporting her research on lingering ash. And lingering ash is what she's looking for. She's looked at several different types of ash. These are ash that, let's say out of 1,000 trees, after EAB goes through, there's still 1 or 2 that appear not to have been attacked or damaged by EAB. So she's doing genetic work, and she's looking at the biochemistry of the trees, trying to figure out how these trees are protected and they can withstand EAB attack. But by and large, I would say that, the EAB, is pretty effective at attacking all ash. There's some variability on which ones are attacked more quickly than others. But then there's this whole issue that we're interested in of the lingering ash. And Dr. Cook is also working on trying to save this genetic material so that, they can get involved with a breeding program, which are in the preliminary stages to have resistant ash that could be used to reforest areas.
Thank you very much. And Faith Campbell also mentions that ash in Western Europe is also vulnerable, which I think I have heard that as well. Okay, Ben, I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but maybe you know where this information can be found, but we have a question about, have any parasitoid releases been done at McCormick Creek State Park in Indiana?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head. With over 900 sites, I don't have them all memorized. However, I could find that information. My contact information was on here, and I just sent it again as an answer to one of the questions. So it's on here as well. So I'm not sure who asked that question, Vicky. If Vicky wants to contact me, I can answer that question. The other option is you can go to mapbiocontrol.org, and I believe after you register, that's when you'd be able to see where all the releases have occurred. There's a release map on the website, and it's you can zoom in pretty close and see some of the details there. So that's another option as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Cliff says that Cliff is in Indiana. He says we did not release it there yet. That's what he's saying right now. So he probably would know that. Let's see here. Cliff also asks, Ben, you mentioned that recovery does not equal establishment. What are your criteria other than the detailed work demonstrating spread over time and life history, like the Jones and Dwan papers?
So for us, the way that we look at recovery and establishment is you do 2 years of releases. You then skip a year, do nothing, and then you go back and do a first year of sampling or recovery work. And if you find something, then we call that a recovery. And then after that, you do another year of recovery work. And if you find something, then so that's 2 years of recovery, we would then call that establishment. So 2 years of recovery when you're not, at the same time doing releases, is what we look at as calling establishment.
Okay. Bob Hack asks, Ben, is EAB used as the only host for rearing parasitoids in the lab, or do you have substitutes?
The only host. That's all we have.
Okay. And Cliff does mention about the problem with EAB as far as more of an international scope. Cliff says it is a problem in Europe and even in Moscow, but in Great Britain, there's also a fungal blight killing ash as well. So
yes, we did not finish answering that previous question about it being a global issue, but thank you, Cliff. There's the answer.
And Bob Heck also says it's now in European Russia and was found in the Ukraine in 2019 and was found in St. Petersburg, Russia last year near Estonia and Finland. Oh, always fun. The more that you see it, the more they find it. Right now, I am not seeing any more questions or comments to add. But folks, I have added both Ben and Herb's contact information in the email that you will be receiving tomorrow. So if you have other questions that you can think of after the presentation, just wait for that email and you can contact them as well. And I want to thank both of our presenters today. This has been information that I personally have gotten a lot of questions about that. So I'm so glad that you all were able to come on and answer questions and kind of make things a little more understandable. And now we'll be dealing with less rumors or whatever kind of ideas that are going on. And thank you so much, participants, for being here today. And please fill out the survey when you get it tomorrow. It helps us a lot. And with that, I am going to close down the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.